On a freezing winter night when the city seemed wrapped in silence except for the distant hum of traffic and the soft whisper of falling snow, Ethan stood at a lonely bus stop, his breath visible in the cold air as he checked his cracked phone for the time, already knowing the bus would be late again, and that was when he noticed her, seated on the icy bench, her body trembling, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, thin clothing offering little protection against the bitter wind that cut through the street like a blade. She looked lost, broken, like someone who had walked out of a life she no longer recognized, and though every logical thought told him to stay where he was, to worry about himself, to think about how he'd barely have enough money left for dinner once he got home, something stronger tugged at him, and before he realized it, he was stepping forward, loosening the worn jacket that was his only real shield against the cold and gently placing it around her shoulders. The warmth startling her as she looked up at him with wide, intelligent eyes that seemed to carry both pain and power in equal measure. "You'll freeze out here," he said softly, trying to smile even though his hands were shaking now from the cold, and she hesitated as if unused to kindness, then nodded, whispering a thin "thank you" that almost vanished into the air, and for a moment they just existed in silence, two strangers bound by a fleeting act of humanity, until he asked if she was okay. And she tried to answer, but the words tangled in her throat as tears welled up and spilled down her cheeks, and he realized she wasn't just cold, she was shattered, so he sat beside her, ignoring the frozen bench, giving her the simple comfort of presence while she slowly explained that everything she had built, everything she had believed in, had collapsed that night in one brutal boardroom decision, one betrayal, one signature on a sheet of paper, where people she trusted had attempted to force her out of a company she'd spent her entire life building, a multi-billion-dollar empire that the world admired but never truly understood. And as she spoke, Ethan didn't see a CEO, a billionaire, or a powerful executive. He only saw a woman who had been wounded by the greed of others, a woman who had walked away from a towering glass building and into the cold just to feel something real, to remind herself that she was still human, and in that moment, wrapped in his worn jacket and sitting beside a man who had nothing but kindness to offer, she felt warmer than she had in years, and time seemed to pause around them, the snow falling like a curtain that separated their world from the rest of the city, and when the bus lights finally appeared in the distance, she stood slowly, handing him his jacket back with trembling fingers, but he shook his head, pushing it back onto her shoulders and saying, "Keep it, I can handle the cold," and something in her eyes changed, something deep and unshakable, like a decision forming in silence, and she nodded, walking onto the bus, turning only once to look back at him, memorizing the face of the one person who had seen her when she was invisible to the world, and days turned into weeks, weeks into a month, and Ethan returned to his routine, struggling through long shifts, the weight of life pressing down as always, convinced that night had simply been a fleeting moment that belonged to the past, until one morning he was called into an unexpected meeting, led into a towering glass building he could never have imagined entering, where executives whispered and assistants rushed about, and then the doors opened and she walked in, not shivering, not broken, but powerful, poised, dressed in a tailored suit that radiated authority, her eyes steady, her presence commanding the room as she took her place at the head of the table and every head bowed in respect. And Ethan froze, realization washing over him like ice water as he finally understood who she really was, the founder, the rightful CEO who had returned to reclaim her company, backed by new investors, renewed strength, and a quiet fury wrapped in grace. And when her eyes found his, the world seemed to fade again into that lonely bus stop, into falling snow and shared silence, and she smiled, not the smile of a businesswoman but the soft, grateful smile of the woman he had helped. And she told the board the story of the stranger at the bus stop who gave up his only warmth for another human being, the story of kindness that had reminded her who she truly was, and in that moment, she announced that same stranger would now stand beside her as a partner in a new foundation dedicated to compassion, opportunity, and second chances, because any man who would give his last layer of warmth to a stranger deserved to help lead a world that had forgotten the power of empathy. And as the room filled with applause, as cameras later flashed and his story traveled across cities and screens, Ethan realized that a single act of kindness had rewritten the path of two lives, connecting two worlds that had been separated by wealth, status, and pain, all changed by a moment at a frozen bus stop. And as the story spread, touching hearts everywhere, one truth echoed louder than any headline, that real power is not found in money, titles, or towering buildings, but in the simple choice to care when no one is watching. And if this story moved you, if you felt even a spark of warmth in your heart, then this channel was made for you. because here we share stories that remind the world kindness is still alive, that humanity still matters, that one moment can change everything. So don't just watch and scroll away. Subscribe to this channel now and be part of a community that believes in hope, in love, in compassion, and in the power of truly seeing one another.